And in other news tonight, the grandson of Ernest Hemingway, a writer in his own right, John Hemingway, has expanded into podcasting.
Good afternoon. This is Hemingway's Parlay, and I'm your host, John Hemingway. And today we have as our guest star, Brad Blair, who is a paranormal investigator. And we're going to find out what that means. It's a bit complicated, but at the same time, very entertaining.
It can be.
Well, I don't know. Brad, what have you got to say for yourself here?
Put me right on
Are
the
you
spot, John.
still alive, or is this the ghost of Brad Blair?
Last I checked, the pulse was still there, but I have broke that 50 age range, so I do check every morning now and make sure the juices are still flowing. So thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, like John said, paranormal investigator is one of the hats that I wear. I do a lot in the paranormal field, from writing to setting up events to investigations, which is how kind of we got started down that dark and spooky road, so to speak. So, yeah, there's it's not exactly, as they would say, not your father's paranormal field, as things used to be back in the days when the only time you saw or heard anything on ghosts, hauntings, Bigfoot, UFOs was that magical month of October when Halloween crept in and all of the talk shows started trying to get anybody and everybody that wrote books on ghosts and hauntings and things to come on as guests. And that's kind of where I really got a lot of my influence from, watching some of those shows. People like Dr. Hans Holzer, who had over 150 books published in his lifetime. One of the greats, I guess, in my lifetime that I can remember seeing on these shows. And of course, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who have really risen to pop fame now that their Conjuring movies are all based on their exploits from their investigations. So those are the kind of people that I think put things in the spotlight a little more and allowed for shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures to take off in the reality TV genre. And all of a sudden it went from being the creepy kids to being out there everywhere. So yeah, it's been an interesting road, so to speak.
You started off when you were a kid, though.
Mm-hmm. From the moment you first told me about you, I thought, "Oh, this is really funky." Because I have a friend who's a newspaper editor in West Texas, Sweetwater, and he has the ability. And at first, I sort of doubted this, but he sees ghosts all the time, wherever he goes. Yeah. Even walking down the main drag in Sweetwater, sometimes he's seen covered wagons, pioneers going out west, that sort of thing. And I mean, have you ever, he says that you got it or you don't have it. And he probably said he inherited it, this ability.
I have good friends who are psychic mediums, and I guess the best explanation I've ever heard on that is to be psychic is to receive information from outside of the 5 traditional senses. To be a medium is to be able to communicate with the crossover spirits of the dead. So every medium technically is a psychic. Not every psychic is a medium. So I have really good friends that have these abilities or tell me they do and work with them. Some I've been very skeptical with. Well, I've been very skeptical with all of them. I mean, I go into anything we do.
It's like I trust Joe implicitly in everything that he says. I mean, he's an extremely honest person. But this, when he started to explain it to me, it was a bit, beyond the pale. I'm like, Are you a rational man, John?
Yeah, no, I mean, my friends who I have many I've worked with that have these abilities, some have blown me away where they've gotten into things. And before I've gotten to be friends with some people that have been able to walk up and tell me things that they shouldn't know, that they've walked up and done what normally I would consider a cold reading. They look at you, they kind of size you up, and what are you wearing? What kind of jewelry do you have on? And they just make presumptions. I mean, people are a lot more similar than most people like to think. And so there, you can go in, and I've done this before too, and walked up to a friend of a friend who knew I was into this, and, well, are you psychic? And I say, yeah, and I could do a reading on you right now. And most of the time I don't get half of it right. But there have been a couple of times where it's been kind of creepy where they said, oh my God, you can. And I said, no, I can't. I looked at
Brad,
what
you
you're
have
doing
psychic abilities? Is that it?
No, I do not have any.
Your friends do.
I have friends that do, and I have, as I say, friends that have really blown me away with some of their abilities that at least I could not explain away. And I've been in this field really since I was a kid. I mean, we started out, myself and two of my good friends, Steve LaPlante and Tim Ellis, who I formed our group with, our Paranormal Research Society. When we were kids, there was no internet back then, and we were growing up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And if you're not familiar with that area, it's about a third of Michigan's landmass, but there's only 3% of the state's population here. So you grow up doing a lot of things outdoors, and you have very short days in the winter months, short, cold days that ghost stories would come into effect. You'd be out playing at 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's pitch black. So, hey, that abandoned house down there, yeah, I was walking by it, and I heard a baby cry in the basement. And, we'd kind of conjure up our own stories, our own folklore. And we started building on that. And, you develop this really good, I think, sense of exploration living up here in the north. And, that kind of developed and blossomed to the point where when we were in high school and got freed up with driver's license, we'd take rides out and find these old dilapidated homes out in the country and abandoned graveyards. And eventually we started bringing Ouija boards out there, doing little mini investigations, seances, and we called it spooking. That was the thing we did, and that was our weekends through high school. And eventually it caught on enough that we'd have other kids in school, people that, hey, you guys going spooking this weekend? Do you think we could come along? And, what do you guys see when you do this? So,
I was in high school in Montana for a while, and they used to sort of, instead of going spooking, they would go out to the coolies, as they called them, and make out there in the brush or something like that.
Well, we could do that too, but that was different weekends.
Ghost hunting is a great way to meet girls.
Well, they will when they get scared, they'll tend to come right in. So.
Yeah, usually alive though.
Yes, preferably
usually alive, John.
It's like, I'm going to touch that woman's breast and then just go right through her.
Yeah.
Well, I think we call that necrophilia now.
Yeah, yeah, they've got a name for it. They got a name for everything. So, Brad, you are you technically you're one of the owners of the Michigan Paracon.
Correct.
And I mean, I know you go all around the country, actually around the world, to all of these different paranormal conventions and things like that. You and I have talked every once in a while about how there's this thing called dark tourism.
Yeah, dark tourism. It's been there longer, I think, than people realize, but it's really taken a blossom since I think the reality TV genre got so big. And if you ever flip on Travel Channel, almost everything on there anymore is paranormal or paranormal related.
Yeah, I heard that before, and I looked it up and everything. They're talking about tours of Jack the Ripper and where he killed his victims. And have there been any sightings of the victims?
I have heard stories, not direct from the tour guides, but I have heard stories from people. I have a friend that says she has some psychic abilities. That I was on a walking tour with her in the Whitechapel area, and she got this overwhelming feeling, and she was describing things that the tour guide said, well, yeah, this isn't something we talk about on a tour, but these are some of the circumstances that this woman would have been experiencing back at the time she was murdered. And that's a great example for dark tourism, the whole Jack the Ripper, Ripperology. If
is
people,
really wild.
Oh, it's huge, and it's huge money. You look at the Jack the Ripper, the product that they're selling there, all of these tours, all of the books, all of the mystique, the movies around it, that I have to think if Scotland Yard, if the authorities knew who Jack the Ripper was beyond a shadow of a doubt, because let's face it, just about anyone who considers themselves a Ripperologist or loves the Jack the Ripper genre, they claim to know who Jack the Ripper is beyond a shadow of a doubt. And you can ask 18 different people this, and they'll give you 18 different answers.
Wasn't he a royal?
That's one theory. They don't know for sure. At least they haven't released it, and I don't think they ever will.
Everything that's happened to that poor family there, yeah, and their political leanings and everything. Well, I could see that happening. Yeah,
that's a whole other story in and of itself. So,
that's another podcast.
You look at the money that comes in from these tours, though, and from the whole Jack the Ripper. Say Jack the Ripper Inc. There's a whole field for that. You're talking millions of dollars a year. I don't think they would ever announce it, because all of a sudden, once the fascination's gone, once the mystery's gone, then your tours are going to peter off. People, all of a sudden, it's not going to be this great unsolved mystery that we know of right now as the Jack the Ripper field. So yeah, I could see it's a great explanation of dark tourism, though. It's one of those places that people have been murdered, or some horrendous crimes happen, or is supposed to be haunted, supposed to be cursed places, and people flock to these. And like Chris mentioned, I'm co-owner of the Michigan Paranormal Convention. That happens every August up here in Sault Ste. Marie, and we draw upwards of 1,500 attendees per year. We've had people come in from Australia, Germany, France, England, literally worldwide, that come and attend these events. And in fact, I just literally today finalized some things with a good friend of mine in Kansas City to start the Missouri Paranormal Convention, which will be coming up in 2025. I believe the last weekend of February, we're hitting that. So there's definitely a call for this.
Right. How many Paracons are there in the United States every year?
They vary greatly, John. When we started the Michigan Con, this will be our 14th annual. Would have been 15th, but of course we lost a year to COVID. My paranormal partner in crime, Tim Ellis, who I developed all of this with, he and I were flying back from a conference in Florida back in I want to say around 2007, 2008, somewhere in that range. And we were on the flight, and we started talking about putting together something like that. And I said, well, we have a casino in town. Why don't we approach them? And Tim said, yeah, let's work up a game plan. We approached, and they said, yeah, we're looking for alternate entertainment styles. And the guy that was in charge of entertainment happened to be interested in these reality shows. So he got on board, and the rest, as they say, is history. But when we put it together, we had the idea that if we did really well on the first year, maybe we would get a second year. And here we are 15 years later. They start and stop. Most events that start up are on a bit of a smaller scale. We were fortunate to have the casino's backing and kind of had a larger lineup than most would. But in the state of Michigan alone, there's usually 4 or 5 during any given year. And Michigan's a little paranormally heavy, we'll say. But a lot of these dry up after maybe they'll make 2 or 3 years, and that's kind of the standard, and then they're gone. So it's really fluctuating. I can't give you a set answer on how many there are. There's a large one in New Jersey that's held annually. We have ours, and this Missouri one we're going to start up next year. We'll see how that goes. It's almost regional, but if you do it right, you draw from all over the place. And I believe we've had attendees from every state except Hawaii at this time.
You were in the UK a little earlier last year, excuse me. You were in the UK at one, weren't you? Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to be able to speak at the Sage Paracon. That's held in outside of London. This one was at Coombe Abbey. And my wife and I were able to go over and stay for a week, and we talked on our Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries book, which kind of is regional, but not. So
Ness Monster in the Lake Michigan?
We do. We have a Loch Ness Monster in every Great Lake, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
That's part of the book is the great sea serpents, and some of them are not even as much of the serpent type tale, but go back to Native American folklore, which I've gotten into a lot more over the past few years. And you've got Gossi and Ditha in Lake Ontario, who's the sky dragon that crashed into the earth, and Pressy is the Lake Superior sea serpent. There's one in Lake Huron that's goes by several different names. Nobody's really categorized that one quite as much. Lake Erie's got not Champ's Way. There's one in every Great Lake, though. If you look back through history, at one point in time, Lake Ontario, there was a span of something like 73 years that every year, if you look back in newspapers from different regions in Buffalo area and up into Ontario, there are stories every year of people having these sightings. And what are they? Are they overly large sturgeon? Are they something that people just haven't identified yet? We don't know.
Maybe they're crocodiles from Florida that have sort of adapted or something.
Could be escape python, but
I mean, there's a Lake Jessup not too far from Orlando. It is chock-a-block with alligators there.
I think most of Florida is.
Yeah.
That's southern anyway. But yeah, no, we've got all of these great creature sightings, and if you look at the interconnected Great Lakes and compare that to Loch Ness, you could fit thousands of Loch Nesses on the surface area of the Great Lakes. So you've got, it's something like 22 square miles for Loch Ness for surface area. Mm-hmm. So if you figure that over the years, they've never been able to definitively say yay or nay to the monster. They do get sightings every year still. There's a Loch Ness Monster reporting site that you can go on. There's Loch Ness Monster centers. So it's some of these great mysteries that kind of keep me going really in the field and keep me out looking for things. So, if they ever discovered definitive proof of a Bigfoot, I think, much like Jack the Ripper, if you knew who it was, you knew what it was, all of a sudden the mystery's gone. Yep. So I almost hope they don't find these things, that mystery that's out there. I think it's great for children, but I think when you get these things like cryptid creatures, like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, you got your Chupacabra down in South America, that maybe there's something there, maybe there's not, but it keeps the imagination going and it keeps people's interest in the unknown going. And I think that's an important facet of life. You don't necessarily need to know everything. You don't need to know everything that's out there.
It's impossible to know everything unless you want to be a.
Well, I've met some people that say they do.
Yes, you know nothing. For everything.
So now, do you venture into the cryptid creatures, that kind of thing with your stuff? Because I mean, I know that there have been sightings of Bigfoot up there all across Michigan. And we have them here in Ohio too. In fact, one of the largest Bigfoot conventions is down at Salt Fork State Park, which is a massive recreation area. And then we supposedly, well, no, I'm going to be honest with you, I've heard it, I haven't seen it, but we have a Bigfoot or two or something akin to it in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. That's literally, I mean, it includes the city of Cleveland. It's just to the south of Cleveland up into I've heard something that I've never been able to hear again, that I've never heard ever again. And, you hear all of those weird, somebody records it in the middle of the night and it sounded like that. It's kind of scary.
And none of this was you without your shirt on walking through the woods, Chris. Correct?
No.
No, we have been called in. They say we were always the creepy kids, and we've kind of kept an open mind, and we'd always be at the library grabbing books on anything from ghosts and hauntings to cryptids, Bigfoot, UFOs, all of that. So we've gotten calls across the spectrum throughout the years. Just a couple of years ago, Tim and I had to go 10 miles outside of Sault Ste. Marie. This woman who lives next to a game preserve on this very, very rural road, no other houses around, dirt road, found this 16-inch footprint out off to the side of her house. And she said her dogs had been going crazy. She didn't know what to think. So naturally, they told her it was a Bigfoot. Some of her friends, relatives, people around, whatever, and they got in touch with us, and we went out, and I was fortunate enough to get a full cast of this. We got pictures, we got measurements, and I forwarded them to a friend of mine that used to be on a Bigfoot-oriented show on Animal Planet called Finding Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And Cliff was more the scientific guy on that. So I showed him all of the pictures, went over the measurements, and he said, yeah, look at the ridge in the foot. You can see the toes here. And he went through everything scientifically with me. And I said, yeah, that's what I thought, but we only found one print. But it was right off the road, almost as if somebody had stepped over, like they were looking down. The rest of it was all gravel. And it had rained, of course, between the time she called and the time we got there. So it was a bit distorted. But the interesting thing is the area it's in has plenty in the way of wildlife. There's plenty to sustain a large creature, a large predator, omnivore. Water sources right through there. And not too far from there, as the crow flies, for an 8-9 foot tall cryptid. There's been other sightings in the Tequamanon area park, which is a big waterfall and recreation area up here. And I had a young lady send me a picture that I'm not sure it's your typical Bigfoot picture. It's a little bit blurry, but it looks like something looking out from behind a tree.
A little bit blurry if taken from 3,000 yards away on an iPhone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but no, she explained this feeling of dread that she had. She said, I was with one other person. We were on this hiking trail, and I could hear something crashing in the woods. And I looked, and I just saw this hair about 8-9 feet up. And she said whether or not it was a bear that was up on its hind legs, but she said it was kind of peeking around a tree. And she said, I was overcome with this feeling. And she said, we got the hell out of there. And I said, I don't blame you. You made the right move. If it was some type of predator or if it was a Bigfoot, said either way, you don't want to be sticking around there on your own. Well, come to find out afterwards, other people had seen what they described as this giant figure walking through the woods in that same area. So I have yet to discover anything in the way of tracks when we went out there, or any type of hair samples, anything along that lines. But the mystery is out there. And if you look at the sheer number of sightings across the U.S. and across the Upper Peninsula that get called in every year, it makes you wonder. It's kind of like the old X-Files poster, I want to believe. That's kind of where I'm at in the cryptid scene. I love the concept. I love the mystery around it. I love the thought that, there could actually be other creatures out there that we have not cataloged yet. So, we keep at her. Like I say, I'm 50 now. I hope when I'm 70, I'm still out doing this. And I hope the mystery and the intrigue is still there.
I did get my dog out there. He was just making too much noise in his cage. And then he said, that was enough. Okay. But then when he started snoring, I said, no.
Well, Hugo wanted to contribute. Evidently, he's seen a ghost.
Yes.
Yes.
You never know. They say dogs have a little bit further perception into the spectrum. So,
well, logically, because other animals have their eyes are. We're all familiar with a cat and how they can see in the dark, which is a very limited amount of
this
light.
other thing is about 50 years old now, so there may have been people who died in this apartment. I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible, but if a dog can see it, I can't. Why not?
Yeah,
give me a solid reason.
Well, scientifically speaking, dogs, cats, most animals can see further into the visual spectrum, into the light spectrum than humans can, and they have more attuned hearing, and it's just nature. They've needed that to survive.
That's one of your tools, I would imagine, when you're.
I don't.
Ghosts is the light spectrum.
Oh, absolutely. And we have full spectrum cameras that we'll use, and we have infrared and FLIR, forward-looking infrared cameras that we'll bring out. And sometimes you catch some things that you can't explain away. Sometimes you'll see things that you just need to go back and reevaluate and say, was somebody standing over here? Did they have their hand up against this wall, and that's what left this glowing red spot? Sometimes it's just creepy people that you're dealing with that are amongst the living, and it's not anything in the way of ghosts or hauntings, but we probably run into that more than we do anything we can't explain away.
Malignant narcissists.
Well, we go through an entire list before we'll go in and do an investigation. If it's a family home, you know, does anybody have any type of mental issues? Is anyone on any type of drugs that could be causing them to hallucinate, to have any type of an outburst that you might not realize? You know, is anybody dependent on alcohol? We go through an entire list, and it gets very personal. And some people don't like to answer those, but we travel a lot. And if we're going to be somewhere overnight or for 2 nights and on the road, and it's just somebody that has been misdiagnosed or has not been bothered to go and get diagnosed for an illness, which has happened with us, we're not going to put out the money, the time, everything that we do to get to a location and then get turned away because this has happened. Perfect example, a number of years ago, we drove about 3 hours south of Sault Ste. Marie into Lower Michigan, went to set up. The family had filled out our whole application. They filled out our form. Is anyone on any type of hallucinogenic drugs? No. We got there, and the windowsill over their kitchen sink looked like a pharmacy. It was all pill bottles. We started looking. They obviously had some issues going on with the people living there. One of the areas that they claimed would be very haunted had an actual hole through the wall that if you looked right, you could see outside and feel the breeze coming in. We were there for maybe all of an hour, and we said, we can explain away everything from those bottles over your sink to the damage at your house to other maintenance issues that you have. We're not going to waste our time, and we're not wasting a night spending, over here in your house while this are obvious issues that you lied to us about. If they would have been honest and said, yeah, we have this going on with the home, we have this, our children are on different medications, and that's something different altogether. But when you go in and they've told you flat out, no, this isn't happening, we don't deal with any of this, then we're not going to give them the time. We just don't. We're all in our team, the UPPRS. We're all professionals. We all have day jobs. We're all leaving our families to do this on occasion. So, yeah, that's one of the worst things that can happen when you make the investment of traveling to do a case and you find out that you've been flat out lied to, and it's fraudulent, is what it is. So, it's happened on the odd occasion, not a lot, but. And then you have cases where it's people that are lonely and they visualize these ghosts. They might create them in their heads, which is sad on occasion. We've been into homes that it's been an individual living alone, and they sit and watch these TV shows with the ghost hunters and think, yeah, no, I heard this, and I heard something in my back room every night. And yeah, I want to call these guys in to come and check it out. And really, they're looking more for company, some of them. And then you get the occasional case that shit's just weird. We can't explain. Our end of an investigation report looks like a maintenance report.
Is this essentially proof positive that there is such a thing as a soul?
That's the $1 million question. And
it sounds rather religious to me. I mean, belief, faith.
What I've found is the more you're in this field, the more you realize you don't know. I have friends that will swear that if you have things moving around in your house, it's not a ghost. That's an extraterrestrial that's causing this to happen.
Oh.
I have friends that have done a lot of research and claim it's interdimensional, and we're crossing over dimensions with something that's right next to us, and that's what's causing us to see things. I have friends that think they're time slips. You're seeing a ghost. It's actually a person from a different time that was there, and we can't explain why we're seeing it or if they're seeing us. So there's so many theories that it's not just the grandpa died and now he's sitting in his favorite rocking chair in the corner and we see him every night. When we start analyzing that a little bit more in depth, well, are we seeing grandpa, or are we seeing a recording of grandpa that's burned into the environment somehow? And we're not exactly sure at this point in time, but something is bringing that out. There's something, whether it be in the air, whether it be the weather, whether it be what your house is constructed from, but it's this recording that's burned in there that, you know, every Saturday night at 9:00, this lady walks down the stairs, but she doesn't interact with us. We can't question her. We can walk right through her and she won't know we're there. Is that a ghost, or is it something naturally occurring in the environment that we just don't know how to explain yet? And we don't know. You know, it's science, I always like to say, is a very arrogant pursuit, in that a lot of the professional people that are investigative scientists in different fields do not want to have anything to do with what's considered paranormal, because they can't take it into a laboratory. They can't quantify it. You can't make it jump through a hoop on demand. So they just ignore it and say this can't happen. Where those of us that are out in the field conducting different experiments and trying to record, trying to make a conversation with something that may or may not be there, there's tons and tons of what I would consider solid evidence. We have voices answering questions on our digital recorders where no one was there. We have pictures and videos of objects being moved when no one was near them. You know, these kind of things, but science doesn't know how to explain them away. So 100 years from now, maybe there'll be no paranormal investigation field. Maybe there's an answer for everything. It just hasn't gotten there yet. So until that happens, you know, we'll be out there playing around in our abandoned houses and haunted homes and whatnot. So.
I would think that probably the existence or the eventual decline of this has a lot to do with the fact that we live in a highly technological society. Mm-hmm. Whereas before the industrial revolutions around the world, people were very much attached to the place where they lived, and there might have been a castle there, and of course there was the history to it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we have that as much now here. Although an interesting chapter is one that I read from your soon-to-be published book about Flight 401 on Eastern Airlines, which crashed around Christmas in 1972. And I was living in Miami at the time and everything. I found what you were writing there fascinating, because at the time I hadn't heard anything, you know, on the news, on TV about the ghosts. I think also the higher ups of Eastern Airlines did everything they could to sort of, you know, get rid of these speculations, shall we say. Mm-hmm. I mean, you told me in that, you told me like you were reading it to me, but I found it fascinating that at one point in another Eastern flight, they discovered that someone was sitting in the seat, which should be empty. And they called the captain out. And he says, "Oh yeah, that was so-and-so, the captain of the Flight 401. And only when he said his name did the ghost disappear."
Yeah.
And then there were other things. And this leads me to think that this whole thing is sort of supercharged energy, you know, that has to be released in some way. And in fact, they were pieces of the plane which they salvaged, used in other Lockheed Delta and Delta 11s. And only in those planes that had parts from Flight 401 did people see the faces, for instance, of the engineer looking out at them from what is that thing? The microwave,
Yeah, off of the oven.
I mean, that was weird. I mean, that is really weird shit, everything. Out there in the middle of the Everglades and everything. And wow.
Yeah, the flight crashed and they tried to salvage. What happened is they sent in, I forget exactly how many died on this crash, but the whole flight,
at least,
and they sent in a salvage team to try and take out anything that they could reuse in other flights. And all of a sudden they had these different figures of, I believe it was a co-pilot was seen in the oven screen, and two different stewardesses walked by and recognized him. They'd worked with the man before. And then it was Captain Loft that they saw sitting in a seat, and the stewardess, and they stewardess questioned him, and he wouldn't look at her. He didn't look up, and he went and described him. And when the captain came out, he recognized him right away. He knew him well, and he called him by name, and he claimed he disappeared. So the new book that I have coming out is Paranormal Justice. It's Hauntings, Cryptids, and Curses in the Court of Law. And where this tied in was Captain Loft's family, following the publishing of the book Ghost of Flight 401.
Yeah, I think they were trying to sue the people who.
They tried to sue the author, the publisher. They claimed it was all made up, and they said it was defamation. They said they had never given permission for this to be printed. When it went through the courts, what ended up happening was they said, you cannot file a claim of that on somebody else's behalf. It would have had to have been Captain Loft himself. So regardless of being his family.
Oh yeah, he was really,
the case got thrown out. So it was one of those weird things. And I was kind of surprised myself when I got down this rabbit hole of how many court cases there are out there that involve the paranormal, that have involved throughout the years. And I'm not just talking about, although we do include the old witch trials, Salem witch trials, the European witchcraft laws, which were quite interesting in how many times they went through, reevaluated, and rewrote these witchcraft laws, especially in England, in the Germanic countries. So there were a lot of legal precedents that were set and that have been taken away from some of these laws that are still in use today in the courts. So it was quite the eye opener. Some of the information that I pulled up during my research for the book. In fact, I was worried when I started this project, which was really during COVID. I was sitting around and I had a few different cases that I'd pulled up and I was looking into, and I really didn't have any solid intent to put it into book form. And then, of course, COVID came along and you're stuck in the house for months on end. And at least we were here in Michigan. So I started outlining this and I started researching into more and more cases. And I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to have enough to write a whole book on this. Well, then by the time I started editing things out, I'm like, well, I don't have room for this case. I don't have room for this case. This is somewhat overlapping. So by the time I pared everything down, there's probably enough for a pretty good start to a second volume if I decide to do that in the future.
So you're saying that there's a branch of law which deals with the deceased and their manifestations beyond the grave.
Not necessarily a branch, but there have been many cases where the paranormal have played in, where people have had premonitions that have been brought in on court cases, where people claim ghosts have shown up and told them this is what really happened to me. And in at least one case that I detail in the book, they exhumed the body. The ghost of this woman showed up to her mother at night when she was sleeping, first in a dream, and then the woman claimed that she saw the ghost there. And she had fallen supposedly down her steps. Her husband was cradling her head the entire time that the coroner was there. They were well-known people, and just acted like he was in such grief he wouldn't let his wife go. Well, the ghost that was showing up to the mother-in-law said, no, he broke my neck intentionally, and it was murder. So they
hold on.
Yeah,
this is a court of law. All of a sudden,
yes.
he broke my leg and my neck, and the judge just says, "Oh, sure."
Not exactly quite that cut and dried, but she kept appearing to her mother, and her mother was able to get the body exhumed.
Various sort of things have been happening to him.Maybe the paranormal types are after him too.
They got the body exhumed, and on further medical evaluation, they said, yeah, no, it wasn't from a fall. That neck was, the way it was broken, they said could not have occurred. Well, when she ended up in the courtroom, the defendant, the husband of the deceased woman, he had no problem when the woman said, well, she wanted to present this story that had been brought to her by her deceased daughter. And they thought it would make the mother-in-law look insane. Well, instead, the jury ended up being on her side and went through with it. He was found guilty, They dug a little bit more into the guy's background, found out he was pretty shady. He had 2 other wives who had died under mysterious circumstances.
Oh.
And he ended up getting life in prison, and he died there. There's a plaque. It's the Greenbrier Ghost. If you look it up, there's actually a plaque next to her grave. That is the one case that they knew of in the U.S. at the time that the conviction was brought forth from a ghost. So it's a rather famous story. But there are other cases like this.
When did that happen again, Brad?
Late 1800s. I believe he died in prison in 1900.
I knew the woke was weird like this.
Yeah. So no, there were, and I mean, there's cases right up into one in the 1970s of a woman in Chicago that was found. Her body was staged to have looked like it was a sexual assault and a murder. They'd thrown clothes on her, lit it on fire, and tried to get out. No suspects. This went on for months. And all of a sudden, this woman called the police out of the blue and said, I'm being visited by the spirit of this woman. She said she was murdered. She gave the initials of the person that did it. They evolved the case along more. And she said, no, she said it's so-and-so. He was came over under the auspices to help. Well, they ended up looking into this defendant and found her missing jewelry in his apartment that he'd given to his girlfriend. There's a number of cases that this kind of thing has happened. So that's just in the ghost chapter. We got into a lot of other.
I've never heard of anything like this. I mean, up until meeting you today here. This is what a podcast can do. It can blow your mind in some ways. I'm blowing my mind at this time.
Yeah, no.
I'm just thinking, courts of law.
Yeah,
admissible evidence.
Legislation. No, there's a lot of laws that have been based on things that have happened that the paranormal's been involved in. And you go to certain states, you're not allowed to hunt Bigfoot. It's part of the cryptid investigation I did.
You're not allowed to do it?
There are
chapters,
Washington State, a lot of the West Coast, which is a little out there sometimes anyway, but no offense, I have good friends all out that way, but yeah, there are areas that it is, if you kill a Bigfoot or hunt a Bigfoot, there's a $5,000 fine. You can get jail time. And then you take Texas.
To kill it, okay, and for them to convict you, they'd have to, in that sense, they would have to have the body.
Proof. Right. Right. So,
or Bigfoot is, okay.
That's always been the moral dilemma with the Bigfoot hunters. If somebody ran into one of these and had the chance to shoot a Bigfoot and bring the body in for scientific examination and prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that these creatures exist, is it morally right to do that, for one? Secondarily, if it's in such a small population that it would be considered a
genocide.
That's endangered, yeah.
Yeah, if it's an endangered species, should you be looking at doing this in the first place? And I reached out to a gentleman who runs a Bigfoot exploration group out of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Rich Meyer. I said, Rich, what's your take on this? I said, from a legal aspect, if Bigfoot is such a thing, and he believes beyond a shadow of a doubt there is enough evidence to say, yes, they exist, I said, should people be able to hunt them? And he said, that's always kind of been this quandary. But he said, you look at what will happen and the legal ramifications that go from establishing Bigfoot is a real creature. He said, now you've got to set aside land. You have to have conservancy done for them.
You need to have game wardens.
You need to have, you need to have it patrolled, but then you get into it further in an area like here in the Upper Peninsula. Logging's a huge industry. And we have paper mills, and there's quite the industry around this. Now, all of a sudden, if you have to set aside this huge chunk of land for Bigfoot habitat, and you're closing down the paper mills, you're putting people out of work, and then you're closing down, he said, right down the supply chain, the people that sell them oil, the people that sell them product, he said, there's so much to consider in this that
they'll stop building roads, all kinds of things. Here in the Akron area for decades, when I was growing up, Route 8 stopped at Steele's Corners Road. And it was because there was some salamander that they found that was on the endangered species list. And they were amazed that they even found the thing, but here it is. So they stopped laying, the concrete at the time for this major interstate. And then all of a sudden, they thought they were endangered, and they found them in some state park in the middle of no place in Alabama. And there were hundreds of thousands of these little guys. I'm like, okay, guess what? The Ohio salamanders, we're going to try and save them because there's a few of them, but here we go. Yeah.
You can do whatever you want now.
Yeah.
They stopped commercial fish farming for an amount of time in Loch Ness because they were afraid these commercial operations could have an effect on the Loch Ness monster. When it went to court, they finally let it go through, and they excused, but there was a group of people that was trying to outlaw commercial fish farming on Loch Ness because of the possibility of the Loch Ness monster being an endangered species and living there.
Brad, I have a question.
Yeah.
Considering all of the encounters that there have been between human beings or Homo sapiens and Bigfoot, has there ever been any violence on the part of the Bigfoot?
There are stories, and there are one of the oldest American, since the Europeans established residency here in the U.S. Prior to the Native Americans, almost every Native American tribe has some type of an oral history of a big hairy man, and that they would call the first people, that they were here before the Native Americans came across from the ice bridge, however it happened. But there are pictographs of what we would look at and think of as a Bigfoot that are thousands of years old in caves. And out in California, I can't think right off the top of my head, but there's a whole park that is pictographs. It's ancient native land. And there are multiple pictures of what they would call Bigfoot. And they would talk about how you stayed away from these creatures because they would haul you off into the woods and take you away. One story that Teddy Roosevelt wrote.
You're saying that the Native Americans would say that.
They were afraid of these creatures that they said lived in the woods. So in that part of the U.S., other tribes, they sound a little friendlier, but they, for the most part, would avoid them. They would stay away. Teddy Roosevelt, when he wrote his book, The Hunt, it was pre-presidency. But one of the stories he'd collected was from some trappers that said they were set up. They heard this ungodly noise out in the woods in Montana, and they were terrified. They moved their camp the next day. One of the trappers went out to reset their traps, collect anything that was caught. He came back, and his partner was dead. So the body was just shattered, broken in so many places as if it had been picked up and beaten against a tree or a rock. There was some type of teeth marks in the neck. And he described this horrible sound that they heard, this howling at night, which is a lot of people would associate with a Bigfoot sighting. And he never really explained it away. They had no idea what it was. And Roosevelt never really went on record to say if he believed it was something along the lines of a Sasquatch, but they said it would have had to have been such a large creature that could have picked up and just throttled and beat. They said it wasn't a bear. It was something that beat this guy to a pulp, to death. And
well, he was a politician, so maybe he was thinking ahead.
Well, it could be. It could be.
It's a bit like RFK now. Certain crazy things he said in the past, and people saying, "I don't trust him anymore."
They also
Theodore Roosevelt,
Yeah, no. So there are those type of stories out there. For the most part, the Bigfoot encounters are what we see on TV, on social media. They all seem to be a little bit blurry, or they're a little bit outside of the realm where you can really get a clear look.
Because when I was growing up in Miami in the 70s and everything, everyone had this really sort of, benign sort of feeling. Well, they thought that, oh, how cute, everything out there,
No, the skunk ape, they call it down in Florida.
Okay, we were just fascinated by them, but the idea of violence, it seemed like they were very shy, and they just wanted to keep to themselves. That's it.
Most cases that people I've talked to that are in the field in the specific field of cryptozoology that are looking for these creatures. Usually will describe if they think they're getting too close, there'll be rocks hurled at them, there'll be branches, things thrown at them to try and scare them off. Yeah, larger rocks than you would see a person throw that would land near them. They're either a really bad shot or they're just trying to scare people away, because I haven't heard many cases where people have actually been hit. But yeah, they describe it as the creature taking a defensive stance. So what is out there, what's throwing these, I don't know. Like I said earlier, I'm very skeptical when it comes to Bigfoot, just from the size. And it seems like if it was just an animal, that we would have some type of evidence by now. But it's a big world. You know, it's a strange world. So I like to think that there could be some truth to it. I would not, if you ask me, I would not say that I totally disbelieve, but I'm not going to say that I believe. I think it's a great legend. I think there's a lot out there to back it up, but it hasn't quite been put to rest yet. I know people that have collected hairs.
The teenager in me says it's got to exist, because, you know, it was just so exciting back in those early 70s, you know, at Miami, and all the sightings and everything.
Bigfoot's gotten to be such a cultural icon. No, you've got, you know, Bigfoot's gotten to be, it's outside of the TV shows. Or Expedition Bigfoot that's out right now does great on Discovery Channel. You've got Bigfoot doing commercials for beef jerky. You've got Bigfoot socks, Bigfoot shirts. You've got Bigfoot smacked on just about anything that you can put a creature on. And so it's a big marketing icon on top of just being a cryptid creature, which I think it makes it almost a little more laughable, I think, in some ways, when people try and exploit and try and push this so much into the culture. But it's fun. You know, for me, it's fun. I enjoy seeing mainstream take a hold of this and even playing with it the way they are in marketing and in consumer products. But, you know, the mystery is still there. And I think if it wasn't, you wouldn't see marketing firms putting this out there and using it as something to sell product or something to intrigue people's interests. So, you know, it's I would say the most exploited of any of the cryptids right now would be Bigfoot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't do a lot of research in this, but certainly my teenage years were spiced up with Bigfoot. Yeah. No, that's one chapter, and admittedly, it's one of the shorter chapters in the new book, because a lot of it is very speculative. It's, if these creatures exist, what would lawmakers do about it, and what they have done in some different states. And over in Nepal, they have a whole game preserve set up that is sanctioned around the idea that their version of the Sasquatch populates this area. So people aren't allowed in it. There's no hunting. There's no hike trails. The Yeti, is that it? I'm not sure.
It's the Yeti would be right next door. That is the Tibetan word, and that's, you know, the abominable snowman, the snow creatures on it. So, but yeah, it's interesting, the speculation that's gone into it, and what would happen, how laws have been enacted, and how conservation's been enacted around the possibility that this thing could even exist. So, but yeah, it still fascinates me how some of these cases have been brought up in the past, and some
probably first scale by the Yeti, I would imagine.
It's the Yeti is very sacred if you get into the Himalayan cultures. So it's almost a religious figure. So the way they look at it, I think, is very different from the way we look at it in North America as just a creature. It's interesting, and it's always fascinated me as well, being in just the field of the weird, where some people are cryptozoologists, some people are ufologists, and they follow UFOs, and that's a whole science in and of itself. And cryptozoologists have their own way of looking at things, and very scientifically. And then you get people in from the ghost and paranormal side of things. And we tend to be all encompassing. It's what I've always said. Our ghost crowd, the paranormal researchers, the ghost hunters, tend to be interested in cryptozoology, in ufology, kind of anything strange and weird. At least that's the way I was brought up, where you get the cryptozoologist people don't want to be affiliated with the UFO people or with the ghost people. And the UFO people don't want to be associated with the ghost people and the cryptid people. So there's definitely lines that are kind of drawn amongst it. I've never felt that way. I've thought, everything ties together somehow or another in this world, and it's all weird at some level. So when I approached this book project, I thought, all of this is going to be fair game. I originally looked at it as ghosts and hauntings, and I go back to in the intro to the book, the one story that popped to mind back in 1991. There was a house in Nyack, New York, that was sold to a couple, and it was haunted. And they did not tell the couple that bought it that it was haunted. So they wanted their $30,000 down payment back and wanted to back out of the contract. In this case, Stambovsky versus Ackley made it all the way to the New York Supreme Court. I can remember seeing this when it came on the TV in my parents' living room on the 6 o'clock evening news. A house in New York deemed officially haunted. What the court said when it finally made it up is, through all due diligence, there's no way they could have ascertained that your house was haunted, but you knew it was. And the way the court knew that the people that lived there, or at least believed it was haunted, is the wife, Mrs. Ackley, told everybody that their house was haunted. She described the ghosts. She had an article in Reader's Digest about their haunted house in the Hudson Valley. They had ghost tours that would walk around Halloween time and point out their house. She put it out there so much in the public that their house was haunted that when they put it up for sale, being riverfront right outside in the Hudson Valley area, you would think it would sell fast. It didn't. So they started bumping the listing off into further off areas where people would have no idea that the house had this reputation to it. So whether or not it was buyer's remorse or if the Stambovskys actually moved in and had things occur, we don't know. But the court in New York decided that since they had deemed their house officially haunted, it was haunted, and they had to disclose that to anyone they sold it to. So that was one of the more famous real estate related cases involved in. And different states have different laws pertaining to what you have to disclose if you're selling your house. In some states, if you believe it's haunted, if it's been put out there that it is, then you have to disclose that on your real estate forms, or they can come back and bite you in the ass, as happened in this case.
Really?
Yeah.
Somehow, my friends that are realtors right now are going, now, wait a minute, do we need to do this now, guys? Because there's a case in New York. Everything in New York does it. I mean, if somebody dies if somebody dies in the house, and that's why they're selling it, because they don't want the memories of grandpa over there in the corner, then, that has to be somebody
does
recently
in different
passed in the house.
states, and it depends on the amount of time they died.
John.
Seeing that we have a potential papa of the Hemingway fame, have there been any close encounters, spiritually speaking, with my grandfather there in Key West that
I was in Key West last week, and a good friend of mine operates some ghost related businesses down there, and he runs ghost hunts at East Fort Martello with the famous Robert the Doll, which is supposed to be the world's most haunted doll. That's a whole other story. But he's found people who have claimed that they have seen Ernest on the back deck in the morning times. And he's inquired, and I talked to him a little bit because actually a project that I've
They saw him at his house, so to speak?
At the Key West house. And David had also talked to people that had worked at Fincavilla in Cuba that had claimed they had seen him standing by the pool.
And that would be interesting. I mean, it's empty right now, but
I've had this idea of putting together a haunted Hemingway project, and I don't know how much I can dig up. Reading the letters of, I've managed to pull a few things out, and some superstitions, some different things that Ernest seemed to believe in, or at least threw out there on different occasions. There was one account in the most recent volume of I believe it was one of the housekeepers at the Key West house that was involved in voodoo.
What about the Ketchum house?
I have never heard anything about that. I believe that's owned by a library society now.
Yeah, it's the town library.
They kind of keep that under wraps. One of the interesting things, though, I was talking to my friend David in Key West, and I said, I would love to rent that place for 3 hours some night and just go in and do a ghost hunt, totally on a professional level. He said, I've talked to people that have worked
I wouldn't do it, because if he had any sort of idea of what I did with Strange Tribe and everything, he'd kill me or something.
But David told me that the people that work there have been told, which makes me think there have been some experiences. They are not to talk about anything. If they think they saw a ghost, if they think there's some type of a haunting going on, they're not allowed to discuss it with any outsiders. So that makes me think something happened.
It's really just very, very sort of careful about anything that has to do with that house. They do not want tourists. They certainly do not want people going looking for,
ghosts.
Ghosts.
The ghost list.
That would be. Can you imagine? I mean, there'd be hundreds of thousands of people coming in from all over the world.
Oh, well, dark tourism.
Yeah.
The more haunted a place is, the more people come to check it out.
That's why Savannah exists.
Houses. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, we're announcing in 2 hours a new event that I've just put together with a couple friends of mine. One's on television's Ghost Hunters. Another one's a head writer for Ghost Adventures, which has been Travel Channel's top show for years. And my paranormal partner in crime, Tim, and I are doing an event in Salem, Massachusetts, this June. And you want to talk about dark tourism, that whole town, yes, there's a historic aspect. It's a beautiful town. But if you ever walk downtown Salem, there's witch shops, there's a witch museum. A lot of their tourism is based off of the Salem witch trials. So which would definitely be considered dark tourism. 20 people were put to death, convicted of witchcraft. So we're doing an event there at an allegedly haunted location that's never been investigated before. And we just put it together and said, hey, let's see what kind of reaction we get to this. We've got tickets going up this week. So it's another perfect example of people, hopefully in this case, willing to travel, willing to buy tickets to come out and experience what we do on a paranormal investigation and go about these supposedly haunted places and just some of the darker history. So the market is definitely there right now. And it's an aspect of tourism that a lot of people overlook. But the more you travel in these older areas, like my hometown, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, this is the oldest city in Michigan. It goes back to 1668. And there is definitely that undercurrent of something strange here. And some of the older buildings that people didn't used to want to talk about. But now you see the popularity and the tourist draw and the ghost tours. And all of a sudden, that's a whole side aspect of the tourist industry, which is how I make my...
You should go to Italy, to Veneto, okay, and to Friuli, and then find that place where he was almost killed by an Austrian shell, and it was stopped by an Italian soldier who took the blood. But they say that, some people say that he had a kind of an out-of-body experience, when he was dead, you could say.
He claimed that he looked down and saw his body at one point.
Yeah.
At least I've read that he had this claim that he left his body and looked down and saw it there, and he thought
this is when he was dead. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had shrapnel in both legs, over 100 pieces. So he was bleeding profusely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of the things that made me think: is there a little more to the superstitions of Ernest? Can I dig into this? I know I could write a hell of an article anyway off of what's out there and what I've been digging into and finding. I don't know if I could quite get it up to the size.
Well, I mean, anyone who's a writer has got to be superstitious, because it's just basically
I agree.
Throw your dice, and pick a number and whatever, and maybe the editor will say, yes, I love it, and then maybe they'll say, go screw yourself, so, you never know.
Probably more of the latter, but yeah. No, I most people, especially, and I'm not as much on the creative side for writing. I love doing the research. I love pulling out odd facts, bizarre stories. Going back through some of the research we did, our first 2 books that I wrote with my partners on our team, Tim and Steve, Supernatural Haunts, which was 20 some years of our paranormal investigations throughout northern Michigan, and then Great Lakes Monsters and Mysteries. We pulled out a lot on our case files to write those. So when I sit and look at people that pull out a pen and paper and can just off the top of their minds get creative and write line after line on these stories, it blows me away. So I'm not that type of writer. But I also see how most of those people have at least some type of a deep superstition of one form or another. Maybe they carry a lucky penny or a lucky nut in their pocket all the time. Or, if they're going to sit down and write, they have to do this first. There's a sequence of things that would be considered superstitious that I think every writer goes through.
Well, he was from a very religious family. I mean, he read the entire Bible as a teenager. And so, yeah, I could see that. That's a book of belief, basically, and faith. Okay. And, well, okay, superstition, yeah, probably is if you've had some bad episodes and don't want it to repeat it. So,
yeah, and to avoid them in the first place.
Yes.
They're good luck charms, or you putting on your favorite team's jersey and sitting in a certain chair before they come on TV for the big game. That's superstition, because if you don't do that, they're going to lose. You have to do that.
I knew his brother, Lester. I lived with him for 4 years, and he was superstitious. He was also, Les. He believed in the Bigfoot and UFOs. Oh God, yeah. I mean, he was
really.
A real.
We'll see if I get this project going. I'm calling you.
National Enquirer. Yeah, if you want the real news, like in Men in Black, you go to the National Enquirer.
Yeah, right. Weekly World News. Those top-notch programs.
They should really be killing it right now, with mainstream media.
Well, it's almost as believable, unfortunately, as the Enquirer.
Definitely. Speaking of media, where can our viewers and listeners find you? I know we got it scrolling down there, miparacon.com, and then obviously Supernatural Haunts. That's YOOPER Natural Haunts. Yeah, I know if we Google the Upper Peninsula Paranormal Society. Research Society. That sounds like you.
That's us. So, yeah, that I'm on Facebook, Twitter. You can find me on. I do probably most on those two as far as social media platforms go. It just seems like there's a new hot social media platform every other month, and I'm in my 50s, so I don't really embark that heavily into those. But I do keep up a Facebook page and keep the presence there. Any events, new books, new projects, we always push out there, and usually on Twitter around the same time. So those are the best places to get a hold of me. Normally, if you message me through Facebook, I do check my messaging there more often than I do on Twitter. So you can always reach out to me there, or through the Supernatural Haunts page, which is our books. And now we're starting to list more of our events on there as well. So,
all right. You're going to be, when is the Michigan Paragon?
Michigan Paracon this year is August 22nd through the 24th at Coaden Casinos here in Sault Ste. Marie. And that is 3+ days of presentations, workshops, psychic galleries, nights at the bar, a lot of side events, a lot of fun. It's really built to the point that a lot of our attendees show up in town on Monday or Tuesday for an event that doesn't start until Thursday. I kind of kick myself now because I really started open another can of worms, I guess. We started doing a pregame party, we call it, in the casino on Wednesday night that we pack in. That's, just some little fun side panels that we'll do in the back bar on a small stage, and we've packed that the last 2 years. So now they want us to keep that going as well. So that one is wide open to the public, no ticket required Wednesday night, and then presentations start Thursday, run all the way through Saturday. It's a really fun weekend for people who attend it. For those of us that put it on, it's fun when Sunday rolls around and it's over.
Everybody go home,
and
please.
we wrap everything. Yep. There's a lot into it, and it's definitely a labor of love. It's something that takes about 14 months to put on. So 2 months prior to this year hitting, we'll be into the works for the 15th annual. So that's it. It's just a nonstop cycle. If I didn't love doing it as much as I do, we would have ended it a few years ago.
It's a lot of work.
I say keep it up.
Thank you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's fun. And they said we're just starting off with this new Missouri Paracon that's going to hit in Kansas City in 2025. And I'll be posting more on that on my social media sites as well as we get things rolling on that. But ticket sales for that are going to start in another few weeks here. So that'll be popping up as well. Luckily, I've got a partner with boots on the ground out in Kansas City that's doing all the legwork. And I'll sit here and do all of the work behind the computer screen as much as I can.
Like Chris.
Sounds good. Well, Brad, we appreciate your time this afternoon.
Anytime, guys. Thanks.
Very
anybody wants
chat. That's yeah.
Yep. Anybody wants to find Brad, they can find him at miparacon.com or ubernaturalhaunts.com. Mr. Hemingway, it has been an honor as always.
Thank you, Mr. Merchant.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.